Why don't we go ahead and get started then if you guys are ready. So let me first introduce our moderator for the session, titled Cybersecurity. And I think during this pandemic and as we start to look at new ways of offering digital health and what we've heard from our guest speakers so far this morning, what a critical role that cybersecurity is playing, and not just all these newsworthy issues that we're seeing across the country and hearing about, but it becomes relative to, we're trying to extend out beyond the walls of healthcare. And so I think the traditional approach to IT security had been protecting what's inside the walls of our organizations. And now trying to offer virtual health seems to kind of cascade well beyond that. So with that, I will turn it over to Fred Bishop, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at UC Health. And so Fred, thank you for joining us this morning. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Alex. So today's panel discussion is going to be cybersecurity, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Before we get to all of that, I have a little bit of cybersecurity humor for everyone. For those of you who are parents with children who are able to get on the internet and do their things, ransomware would be a little helpful if we could knock them down a little bit. What's a IT presentation without Dilbert? So why phishing scams keep working? Enter your bank account number, scam. Wait for it. Enter your bank account number, scam. There it is. Enter your bank account number. Okie dokie. And we know as cybersecurity professionals that is however many times it takes, eventually someone is going to click on that link and do what we've asked them not to do. And of course, our budgets sometimes get a little frayed, and hopefully we're not down to this level of disguising sensitive information. And then finally, who said Twitter doesn't have some good jokes, right? What did the red teamer say to the blue teamer? Click this link. All right, I have the utmost and greatest pleasure to introduce a phenomenal cybersecurity panel today. And I think we're all going to be really, really happy to hear what they have to say and hear their expertise in cybersecurity. So first, let me go ahead and introduce them each. Chris Kuhl is the CISO and CTO of Dayton Children's Hospital. Mr. Kuhl has accumulated a wealth of knowledge as his career has spanned from entry-level help desk to network engineer and architect to cybersecurity architect and CISO CTO for numerous U.S. organizations. He has participated on red and blue teams for medium to large organizations in Ohio. Mr. Kuhl holds a master's degree in information assurance, is a certified information security system security professional or CISSP, a certified information security manager or CISM, and holds 5 SANS GIAC certifications plus others. Next on our panel is Greg Peebles. He is currently the Director of Information Security for St. Elizabeth Healthcare System in Northern Kentucky. His previous roles included Director of IT Security for Omnicare, a Fortune 500 healthcare services company specializing in management of pharmaceutical care for long-term care, and wholly owned by CVS Health, a Fortune 7 company. In addition to his role at Omnicare, Greg also managed the system security operations team at CVS Health, including antivirus, endpoint encryption, file integrity monitoring, database monitoring, and security operations, budget, and compliance. Prior to Omnicare, Peebles led the IT risk and operational risk programs as part of security for Vantiv, the second largest credit card processor in the US. Greg also previously led the security and audit practice at Clark Schaefer Consulting, and other roles have included time at Arthur Andersen, Provident Bank, and Convergys. Mr. Peebles has a Master's of Science in Cybersecurity and holds numerous certifications, including the CISSP, CISM, CEH, which is Certified Ethical Hacker, and several others as well. And then finally, Stephen Ramirez is the AVP and CISO at University of Louisville Health. He has 10+ years in healthcare, cybersecurity, and risk management. Stephen has supported both payer and providers within healthcare, also having previous roles with IBM Watson, Change Healthcare, and McKesson. Mr. Ramirez holds a master's in healthcare administration and certifications as a CISM and a CBCP, which stands for Certified Business Continuity Professional. please give a big virtual welcome to Chris, Greg, and Stephen. Okay, I just have a couple of slides that I'm going to talk about briefly, and then we're going to get into actual discussion with the panelists. So this kind of sets the stage for this discussion as a whole. You know, the conundrum here with cybersecurity is everybody wants their information any time of the day, anywhere, anyhow, using any app. And not everyone wants it, but there's enough folks that do want it that way that businesses are obligated to cater to that and to provide those services. And so in order to do that, the cloud becomes one of the easiest and fastest ways for getting that data to and that information out to those individuals. And you know, the opportunity that the cloud presents also then creates the conundrum. It becomes such a mass scale implementation, and the cost of doing business in the cloud goes down. And now all of a sudden, even our cybersecurity criminals and adversaries are now able to utilize the cloud to deliver their product or their services, which are in fact, you know, cybersecurity attacks. And so this really presents a huge problem for cybersecurity professionals. We've expanded our footprint into the internet, and at the same time, our adversaries are able to utilize that against us. So in today's discussion, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the panelists did want me to make sure that everyone knows that when we're talking about the good and bad and ugly, we're not talking about them. So the three of them aren't the good. One's not the good, one's not the bad, and one's not the ugly. But we're going to first start really on the dark side, and then we'll move our way to the light side. Hopefully, if we have a little bit of time, maybe answer some questions. If not, certainly post those questions in and we can get some answers back to you later on. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started, and I'll introduce the topic of conversation for the first section, which is the ugly. Numerous U.S. industries, critical infrastructure, including healthcare and government agencies, have experienced well-publicized cyber security attacks, resulting in various levels of impact. When organizations are hit with a serious cybersecurity incident, the significance of the impact is often downplayed. Please elaborate on the real impact that these attacks have had and will have in healthcare, as well as other critical infrastructure. I'll let the panelists go ahead and unmute themselves and have at it.
Well, this is Greg. I'm on top, so I guess I can go ahead and go first. You know, when we hear about, I think about, you know, Scripps Healthcare out in San Diego, they were down for a month. And University of Vermont, they were down, I think getting all their systems back were 3 months. And we're just fortunate that University of Vermont was so open about kind of their challenges. But I don't think we're naive to think that those organizations had significantly worse controls than what we have. We're going to have to assume that they probably, you know, I know my peers were all kind of generally about the same place. So we know that they had controls in place. And so, it could be us. And we have to stay vigilant on, we continue to improve our controls, but those risks, could be us if they choose to target us. We talk about 0 days, but that new vulnerability, that new attack, if they chose for us to be first, those controls, the threat intel wouldn't be out there. So we would wind up having to be a martyr for everyone else. So that's, I think we kind of live every day knowing that our controls are built on what we knew yesterday.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Greg. Right, exactly like you're saying, the 0 day, we're not aware of where that's gonna pop out of the shadows from, and what it could go against and exploit. And like you said, right, we have Scripps and the University of Vermont. One thing, and then most recently, the unfortunate death of an infant because the hospital was dealing with a ransomware attack, and were not the alarming or alerting systems were not online, and that caused the unthinkable to happen. But the truth is that organizations are, unfortunately, I think, just now, especially healthcare and the rest of critical infrastructure, are really starting to understand the necessity, the importance of cybersecurity, and how it can actually be a business differentiator for organizations. Have you been breached? No, we haven't. But the University of Vermont, with the amount of time they were down, when they reported it last in December of 2020, that total downtime was around $63 million. We use that information. I'm kind of bouncing around. But we really look at that type of information and use that with our senior leadership and also out to the organizations to help reinforce why cyber is important.
Yeah, and I'll definitely echo what Greg and Chris had said as well, that we've seen University of Vermont end of last year with that, almost $70 million, and then Scripps was 120 million that was lost over their downtime. So both of those were extended of 30 to 45 days total. There was actually a great 405D webinar on lessons learned for University of Vermont. So they, really told us, a lot of components and best practices that they learned from that incident going forward. And a lot of that's getting back to Security 101 that we've seen on that too. Really making sure you have a good program in practice, and it's not all about tools. It's, that good combination of people, process, and technology associated with that. So, critical infrastructure across the board, as we saw, there was also the meat processing pack, they were attacked. There was, of course, seems like every week there's a new ransomware event in healthcare that we saw. Schneck Hospital up in Indiana most recently attacked with that as well. But it's definitely something, critical infrastructure, again, is critical infrastructure for a reason that we see. So that what makes it so lucrative to the bad guys, that it is something knowing that people will likely pay if they don't have controls in place to look at that. So.
Great. To the panelists, do you think, you mentioned the baby that may have lost its life as a result of, at least in part, of a cybersecurity event. Do you expect or think that we will have additional loss of life that are even more directly attributed to a cybersecurity incident?
Yeah, I do actually. I'll jump in first on this one. So Ponemon Institute actually released as a part of their study white paper that they released, they surveyed around 600 healthcare organizations across the US, and ranging in various sizes. And what they saw was actually pretty startling in my mind. 70% of those organizations that were hit with ransomware. So out of the 600, 40% of the 600 said that they had been hit with ransomware in the last 2 years. And 70% of those actually saw longer stays or delayed tests. And then if you break it down even further, 36% of those saw complications from procedures, and 22% of those saw an increase in death rates in their organizations with their patients because of the cyber attacks and the organization trying to recover and not having access to the information systems that they need to get the data out of or run the tests off of. So unfortunately, I think that as this continues to go on, and proceed, we're going to start seeing that, or we're more of that, or we're going to have to start taking more proactive stances, getting support from leadership and the board so that we can put these controls in place to prevent and reduce the risk.
I would agree with that too, Chris. I would say I would hope not, but I'm sure that that's maybe the first of a few more to come in the pipeline. And I think a big part of that is, and something we've tried to make a focus on, is doing a lot of collaboration with our clinical and emergency preparedness. So we've created a code yellow cyber at our organization. So that's part of in working in conjunction with our clinical and our emergency preparedness team on that. Again, because we're seeing a lot of our new nursing staff, residents, and new age doctors that a lot of them haven't had to do downtime. That's a lot of what's coming out of the lessons learned about going back to paper, going back to manually read these central monitoring, going back and looking at the modalities and all of that. That again, care can continue, but you have to go through and have that methodical checklist of what you're doing to ensure you're doing proper patient care associated with that. So to Chris's point, that's where you have to collaborate with the business and make sure that you do have that good cyber resilience program. So I know that's a big push in the industry that, while the IT teams are working on that, how can your organization continue operations from a cyber attack and really focus on that quality patient care? Because again, we all know what makes us more at risk is our attack surface and multiple medical devices, IoT devices. But now if those are down, how do we still continue that care with the dependency on technology? So.
The whole reason that we went to EHR systems, electronic healthcare, was to provide better, faster care. You remove that, and as Stephen said, there's the people that maybe grew up kind of using those manual processes. There aren't many of those around, so we would obviously lose that kind of knowledge. And then you think about all the systems that interface. So how do we get lab results to the right spot? How do we get PACS images to the right people? And those are things you have to think about. Oh, do we have to go manual? But if you look at the examples we talked about, 30, 45 days, you can't wait, for those type of results to provide healthcare. So it turns from an IT problem to an operational and problem, but so I call it's an organizational risk, not just an IT risk at that point.
Great points. Okay, we'll kind of stop the ugly here. Let's go to the bad. So information security professionals always have to balance limited financial, human resources against what oftentimes seems as endless risk. Representative of healthcare in general, please discuss some of the most critical risks healthcare faces, how those risks are evolving, and the various shortfalls that limit mitigation and remediation.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Greg.
No, Steve, I've started one before. We'll start with Steve.
Oh, well, I'll start this time, guys. How about that? So, again, that we've seen that just again, our attack surface in general, we have medical devices, IoT devices, we have phones, as you hear. So, we really have, a multitude of things that are on the network. So again, that just in general, puts us more at risk as a lot of other industry. But also, as we saw with COVID-19, that forced, a lot of our organizations to move outside of our normal perimeter of sending people home, of also setting up COVID testing and vaccination sites. So again, that's, setting up those operations outside of satellite hubs. That again, does make us more at risk. But again, I still think it's phishing. I mean, I think from everything that we see, phishing is still the most effective and efficient means for, threat actors to gain and, implement ransomware, malware within our organization. So it's still, our end users being, and what we like to say are insider threats. Again, our people internally that, again, they're our first line of defense, but they're also our biggest risk. So that's really where we have to focus on training and awareness associated with that. But across the board, again, we have a lot of aged infrastructure, a lot of medical devices that, again, we just have a bigger attack surface, I think. So that puts us more at risk and dependent on really what our focal point is. If you're like a trauma one versus, a children's hospital versus this, you'll have different risk across the board. A lot of us in healthcare have a lot of the same risks, but again, on what your patient population is, and then, that really helps drive what your biggest risks are. You can't mitigate all risks, so you really need to focus in on how you can focus on those big ones, get your quick wins, and really put in that people, process, and technology to address those.
I look at just the 4 years I was at, St. E, when you have Epic, it interfaces with probably 200 different systems. When we first evaluating vendors, most of those vendors were, software that was installed in our data center. And just over the last 4 years, we see those vendors moving their products to the cloud, and our sensitive data. So our due diligence has to improve with that. There's two risks with that I see is, the more vendors you have with data that's housed outside, the more likely that one of those will have an issue that impacts you. But then your management effort of access to all of those products, because they have some portal, say, that you can go look at, that just increases the workload and effort of managing that access, without additional tools. And then those tools take time as well. So I see that as a risk. When we talk about, the wearables, sending stuff home, those will just somewhere else that exponentially grows our space of what we need to manage. And then, let's say operational folks may not appreciate, I've got this wearable, but it still has an operating system. It may have a default password. These are things that need to be managed. So just because it's, inexpensive does not mean it's without risk. So our market of what we have to manage is continuing to grow. And so that may spread our existing security resources thinner. We have to be smarter. We're pushing policies and expectations out to the businesses just to remind them, hey, you got technology, we need to figure out how to manage it. And then we want to get engaged earlier in understanding what those products do, communicating the risks, and be a business partner. So those are, what we need to manage from a security teams is growing, and we need to continue to adapt to that. I think, we moved to Office 365 before COVID, and it was a huge success for us as a tool during COVID for interaction and working. But then you're thinking, okay, well, we've moved data from our data center to Microsoft's. Well, we can trust Microsoft, but there's still challenges to go with that. How do we configure, personal devices, C&E devices? Again, it's just more capability, but more things that you want to manage correctly.
Yeah, and both Greg and Stephen had touched on it, but what we're seeing is one of the biggest risks, in my opinion, across healthcare and really all industries, all sectors, is the big push at the beginning of COVID with sending people that can work from home to work from home and staying there for an extended period of time. And we've one thing that we've tried to stress early on, and I know these guys have as well to their users, is we have to keep your technology, your systems up to date that you're taking home, your laptops and docking stations or what have you. But we've also stressed to our employees that you have to keep your home systems up to date as well, because those users that work from home, they have a direct connection through VPN or some other mechanism directly into the organizations, and they can access personal email on their personal devices at home that can easily spread to anything that might be on their wireless or their plugged in network. So, not only is IT, exactly like they were saying earlier, right? Not only is IT focusing on the assets and the resources, but now we're being spread even more thin, trying to help educate our users on how to secure their personal environment at home. So that's one of the bigger risk factors that I see.
Yeah, I think you've all touched on very valid points. Certainly the work from home environment has become huge in many organizations, and some great benefits with it, but also obviously some significant risks. And it is very hard to manage. I can echo very much the same things you all have spoken about, and in that those users are at home. They may not realize their television is a risk, is vulnerable. Their Nests thermostat is vulnerable, right? And so all of those can certainly be then leveraged if compromised, can then be leveraged to further compromise. But we've even seen users directly connect their PC to the internet, to the back of the modem, and get a IP address, and attacks automatically just happening in real time against that computer that's now sitting behind nothing. No network address translation or router or anything. So definitely hard to manage the work from home. And there are tools out there, but you got to implement them. You got to make sure they're working properly, and all of that takes quite a bit of time. So let's explore a little bit further. Talking about cloud-based vendors, I think Greg, you maybe have touched on that a little bit. How do all the interrelationships between vendors? The Kaseya, for example, incident that occurred is a great example of where one vendor is compromised, but then causes multiple other vendors to be compromised. Let's talk maybe a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And what makes it worse is that that's not a new thing, right? Compromising your third-party risk or third-party vendors or your business associates, and then gaining access into another organization, right? One of the first examples that I can remember was back in, I think it was 2013 with Target. That's how they were compromised, right? And then a few years later, we saw that with the I believe it was the accounting or the tax software that actually ended up shutting down Maersk shipping, which then also caused an impact on delay of vaccines being delivered and then going bad. And then here we are with SolarWinds, and it just never ends. So yeah, the only things I think that we can really do to prevent those types of breaches is we really have to do our due diligence on doing assessments and continual assessments of the security posture of those vendors. We have to reevaluate the data that we're sharing with them. If we are sharing any with them, is it the minimum, right? Is it the least amount needed? And if we're not sharing data with them and they have access into our environment to support systems or process something, are we limiting their access to what they can touch inside of the organization? One thing that we're doing at Dayton Children's is we have a platform that we send all of our tier 0 and tier 1 vendors through, and they authenticate against the system. They use multi-factor authentication, and then from there they're presented with essentially tiles of whatever they have access to, and they click on it, and then the platform auto logs them in, and they never see the password. And then we can actually do screen recording of what the vendor's doing on that system. So in case there's an issue, or we want to use it for training and education for our own team members, right? We can go back and watch that video. And then when the vendor logs out, the system will automatically change the password. So even if the vendor happened to get it for that one time, it won't be valid the next time. So those are some things we can do. But when you're talking about SolarWinds or that really needs access to your entire environment for monitoring, or Kaseya, where they should have access to your environment for management and response and alerting. I think really the only things that you can do around those types of things is maybe segmentation, behavioral analytics of both the device and the user or the service account. But that's a tough one. Greg, Stephen, what do you guys think?
I'm going to take a quick poll, a sarcastic poll of our audience, but how many people have had a cloud vendor give them a SOC report from AWS and ask you, is this good enough? And I look at them and say, no, I want to know what you do. What do you manage? And so, it's like, oh, we've got some piece of paper we're going to throw at you, but it's like, okay, AWS manages 20% of all of our IT. So, okay, well, I want to know what you do with the other 80%. So that's just kind of the challenge of vendors. And quite, we can't do our job without business partners, but it's an ongoing challenge. And vendor due diligence is only good as the information yesterday. So, oh yeah, we'll sign a BAA. Well, I've had people sign BAA, and it's like, you don't even have security policies, so you're not HIPAA compliant. So that's a no. But that is, it's that challenge of people to get into the business. But do they want to help you? Do they want to be your business partner? I even think like Black Belt. I got to think that's probably impacted, at least 80% of all hospitals. I thought they had a good reputation for a long time, but they let a lot of healthcare people down, and so it's you can't just trust their reputation from the past, but continue that due diligence. Have to have that expectation, and I think at least from a vendor perspective, to me, it's we're just starting to explore putting let's say servers and our own apps in the cloud. That to us, the cloud impact is, besides Office 365 is all of our vendors that are now cloud based, and there's contractual requirements and expectations, but it's the due diligence beforehand. Is you need to do something. You need to ask the right questions to keep them kind of on their toes, and enough people ask them the right questions, they will improve their controls.
Yeah, and I would agree and piggyback off that. It is all about the third-party risk management process that we use a tool and put our critical vendors into continuous monitoring, because we've seen a lot of emails compromised by vendors. So they'll start phishing us then, which look like a valid partner, and we've seen a lot of that. But we also had one of our third-party reading groups, Foundation Radiology, that they were compromised. So it was a close call, and had you not had secure connections in place of what Chris had alluded to. That's really the importance of having that connectivity controlled, having that detection and alerting up as quick as possible, especially if they have that more privileged access and can, have a bigger risk. Overall, impact your environment if, they do get access to that. But it is ever evolving, ever changing, especially as we're doing the digital transformation to a more hybrid approach of going, cloud and on-prem. So that is, kind of where you have to reevaluate a lot of your security posture for that, because we're always going to be very dependent on, hosted vendors and partners in the cloud. So again, that's about looking at what your potential risks might be, and then how you can put in compensating controls of that. And it all starts with, what Chris had alluded to, setting up that entry point for them, and then being able to monitor what they're doing, when they're doing it, and then, being able to, take action if needed. So.
And this, Greg, I'll put a plug in for the tools like BitSight and Security Scorecard. So the vendor can tell you something or send you a PDF of some policies, but if you start getting independent data, that kind of helps you understand what's going on. And quite frankly, those tools are great at, continually assessing yourself. But, they're not perfect, but they provide data that kind of helps you. And quite frankly, you see something of a challenge, you bring it up to the vendor, and they're either going to tell you, yeah, we had a problem, and we're fixing it, or oops, you caught us. So the more data you have, and I call that independent data, it comes from somewhere else besides the vendor, is always hopeful in us looking at those risks.
Great. Looks like we have a couple of questions here on cloud adoption, cloud solutions, how they've altered our strategies of cybersecurity. How have they improved our ability to leverage cybersecurity? Let's see if anyone has some thoughts on that.
Well, definitely hybrid is the new model going forward. So it's about a lot of vetting your vendors, step one, doing that discovery of what kind of business, what kind of data you're sending them, what it's going to be connected to, because we know like a lot of our integration engines even are going to the cloud now. So again, you have to really understand what processes and upstream, downstream it's touching, because that enables you to put that real-time monitoring and access controlled and privilege access management associated with that. So that's all about going through that due diligence and how you're architecting that into your overall environment. And of course, asking those tough questions that we had asked before, that again, based on what they're doing, do they have basic encryption components in place? Like, are they HIPAA compliant? Do you have segmented systems from, other vendors, being healthcare versus shared infrastructure as part of these? So it's like, really digging into, again, what components you're using with that cloud or that resource in the cloud to go through and then put your security strategy and architecture around that. And, putting 2FA, at a minimum on a lot of that. And then again, to what Chris had alluded to, there's a lot of cool tools out there too now that we can mitigate how the vendor's accessing what are, segment that off of our other systems and everything associated with that. So,
yeah, one thing that that I'd like to add, actually, I mean, Steven's absolutely right. One thing I'd like to add, actually, to the question was, how did that also impact our disaster recovery and business continuity? Because as we move things into the cloud, right, we have some systems that are considered tier 1 for the enterprise, for the organization. And, we did over the last 2 years, we did business impact analysis of all of the departments across the organization and also the sites for the organization and then the applications. And what we found was, right, some of these tier 1 systems that the organization depends upon for like supply chain ordering and those types of things, we didn't have good processes in place if that cloud platform were to become unavailable to us for whatever reason. And so doing those business impact analysis and identifying those, we now have built out those, policies and procedures, and also educated our staff, the supply chain staff and the other tier 1 cloud applications that we use. How do they go about ordering things or doing their job or gaining access to that data if that cloud platform is not available? So, we are, right, as a part of cybersecurity, we have the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability, and DR and BCP fall directly under that availability. So just something else to keep in mind.
And I would say anytime we talk about architectural discussion or vendors or cloud, it's, say, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. But when it comes to cloud, what data is it and where is it going? What path is it taking? And if you understand that piece, you're off to a really good start. And then of understanding how is it controlled at each element and who controls it. That's probably, the big question. I always said anything you can put a name on, it's going to be a lot easier to take care of. But you look at those pieces, I think that will at least be a good start of you got to understand it before you can control it. And, there's plenty of good ideas for controls. It's just a matter of which one fits that challenge. And you have to, I think, understand the challenge before you can solve for it.
All right, great. Let's go ahead. We'll talk a little bit about now the good, and you all have already touched on the good. I think you've referenced it in a number of different ways. And so while information security faces many challenges and the future of our security may remain uncertain, please detail the many good trends and opportunities that exist in the healthcare cybersecurity space. How do people, process, and technology each play a role in success? How do they interact with each other? And then we have a question. I think that was a good follow-up question to this, the good part of cybersecurity.
Well, I'll go first on this one. For me, the good about cybersecurity is I'm never bored. Before I got into cyber, I was doing Active Directory engineering and architecture and networking, and I tend to get bored very easily. And that's why I kept hopping around, learning new technology. And then I landed in cyber, and I've not looked back because, not only does it change day by day, sometimes it changes hour by hour. And, you have to constantly be educating yourself on the latest trends that attacks are coming in, the new variant of ransomware, different, techniques, tactics, and processes that, different groups are using, and then be able to turn and look at your organization and your infrastructure and be able to basically do a risk assessment of, okay, if this version of ransomware is spreading through this method, are we protected against that? And, putting those protections in place if you're not. So, I view that as a definite good. I love education. I love learning. And I definitely get that in cyber.
And we're definitely, it's on the forefront. It's on, as we're saying, that it's been in the news for the past year, and it's it's the reality now. So it's like that's really what we can use as security professionals and IT professionals to help sell to our executive team on that. Either we're investing today or we'll be a headline tomorrow, is a lot of what we like to look in that. And it's not all just about tools. It's, about, again, that good mix of people, process, and technology, that you, again, have to have the policies and process on how you want to enable a lot of these practices. The people that understand those process technology, their roles, we create a lot of RACI charts to make sure that we do have, the roles and responsibilities built out within our teams, and then baking in those technologies that make sense, especially on early detection and containment, as we can do that. That's the biggest. You can't mitigate every risk. You can't stop everything that enters your environment, but you can, know as quickly as possible, contain that, and then, be able to jump in with your IR teams to really mitigate that out of the organization. But again, visibility, discovery is key to what we had talked about earlier on in that. And I think that last question and that was posed on there, really identifying your weakest links. Again, if just because it's a risk doesn't mean it necessarily is going to be a critical risk to your organization. So that's where prioritizing your risk based off of the technologies it touches and or its potential impact to the organization are really important on doing that. So again, marrying all of those components together to gauge what the impact to your organization would be. But again, use this time to sell that to your board to get what you need, because it's doesn't seem like this is going to slow down going forward, especially in healthcare. So.
This is Greg. I think the one good I want to share first is you look at the pictures on the side of the screen. I think I know every security leader of every healthcare organization within 100 miles of Cincinnati, and I don't think any one of them would hesitate to help you if you had a question or a concern. A lot of us get together and chat on a monthly basis, and then we have side chats. Chris, has a very strong technical background. I haven't ever hesitated to, bounce something off him, especially, they were on the O365 journey kind of before us. So I think the willingness of the security community to kind of share together, come up with ideas is probably, the best good that can come out of this conference is, you see somebody you want to reach out, say, we have some challenges. Tools are important. We can't do our job. We can't manage technology without tools. But, when I think of probably one of our best controls we have at St. E, quite frankly, is what we call our mail admin process, is having users, submit suspicious emails. And, I'd say we're getting, email number one, quite frankly, reported, 10, 15 minutes, you can turn around, you can start pulling emails, blocking URLs, etc. And that is all about humans. I was not a big fan of security awareness early on. I said, we need controls. They need to be, strong technical controls. But, the more I'm in the business, you understand the interaction of users and technology. That's been a huge control for us. So, we have multiple email filtering, technologies, but it still comes down to users saying, hey, this looks funny, smells funny, I probably should go ahead and report it. And that's been a great control for us. I think working in healthcare, when you look at the nurses, especially I think of the nurses, they're on the floor, they're so passionate about what they do. And, the people in this industry are want to do the right thing. And I feel like, in IT, we are hoping to support that. So, there is kind of mission behind behind what we do. And so I feel like, if I have a security issue, I think all of IT is with me. Now they may have 50 other things going on, but at least, everybody wants to do the right thing. And I think, this industry kind of helps support that. And, our job is just being that security champion and reminder of how do we interface with IT and the organization.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is also very helpful is equating non-technical people and finding analogies to technical controls, right? So, for example, when we talk about hand hygiene and preventing the risk of infection and spreading disease, we talk about cybersecurity hygiene in that same mouthful and say, listen, the things that you do every day on your computer have an effect on our cybersecurity posture. And, just like you wouldn't go into a patient's room having, not washed your hands, having seen the last patient, make sure you're doing those same things when you're on the internet. You're not going to sites that you shouldn't be going to, and those kinds of things. And Greg, it is we as technical people try to put technical controls in place, and that's not always the best approach or the only approach to fixing or reducing the risk. Those are good points. I think we had a question about just commenting on the importance of corporate structure as it relates to achieving goals of your corporate cybersecurity program. So can we get some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's we've seen that vary in the industry, that some people report to the chief risk or compliance or legal or I report to the CIO, but I think that most of those do report to the CEO. So I think you can be successful, that it's more of a cultural thing. From as long as your leadership team is on board on that, you can be successful in that. That again, it's a mix of funding, but as long as you have support, you can make things happen this day and age. So again, that is that top-down approach. And if you have that cultural awareness and support, it's easier to go out there and have those discussions with your end users to help mitigate risk.
I look at our industry as probably having to play some catch up. So, spending some time in the financial industry, public companies that are under annual like bank review and that type of thing, you have a very formal, kind of governance and compliance strategy. Especially when it comes to, let's say, nonprofit hospitals, there's probably some catching up to do. But I think the important thing is that you understand who your stakeholders are. You have just some level of communication with them. It's like, I don't have to get my way all the time, but I do want to be able to share my story and see how it fits in. So, you talk about who should security report to. I think that's a trick question because there's multiple stakeholders. You have to be engaged with all of them. So, legal, audit, and, especially, kind of IT, it's if we're working together, and that's, I think that's kind of where healthcare has something over, other industries, is the willingness to work together, is just making sure that this risk is part of that discussion. How does everybody work together, and then making a security, program that fits the organization. And it's really a goal of taking steps forward and understanding what are the risks that could impact the organization's reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with both Greg and Stephen. I report to the CIO. I have other friends who hold similar positions that report to the chief risk officer or the CEO. And exactly like Stephen said, as long as you have, good support from leadership all the way up the chain, the board, I don't think it really matters whether you report inside of IT or outside of IT. And like Greg had mentioned earlier, whenever we have an issue or we think there might be an incident, we have all of IT helping support us, right? They immediately start asking, what can we do to help? How can we help? And it's fantastic. And that type of a culture, right, is pushed down from the top. So, yeah.
Great. A couple other discussion points with the emergence of passwordless authentication. What level of adoption do you foresee in the healthcare space for clinical end users as well as patients? Any specific concerns?
I know we have tap and go. That's the first thing that we did for that. But I saw something yesterday that I know a colleague of ours out in California is doing a new thing that it's the biometric that providers can go up and just badge in with their wrist. So that's removing badgeless access. And it's based off of your biometric sensors that if you're not available at your device, then it'll log you in and out of that. So I think there's going to be a lot of cool options to come outside of, them injecting something into you, like having a chip that enables you to do that for banking and whatnot. That we'll see a lot of cooler technologies that'll be, enable people to do that. And of course, with that, there's obviously more risks. You got to make sure that if you're having these different mechanisms to log in, that it doesn't have a higher compromise rate. So.
Yeah, we're in the process of implementing the tap badge. And then our next step is actually, after we get that completed, we're already researching how do we go to a passwordless, organization for the non-clinical side, right? Because clinical will have that badge tap, or like Stephen was saying, be able to run their wrist over something if that's the next iteration of a badgeless or a passwordless authentication. But we are looking at the FIDO keys and also different types of facial recognition, and then have the device push a prompt to your MFA application so you can hit approve to authenticate into the environment. So it's things that we are looking at today and trying to figure out, does it work in our environment? Because it won't work in every environment, but does it work in ours? And what are some of those concerns? So we're early on in defining those. But if you check back in 6 months, we'll probably have better answers, or at least I will.
It's kind of funny. I had a fingerprint reader 15 years ago. I saw, man, this is going the way things go. And I know like the restaurant industry kind of picked up on it, but never really saw it take off the way I expected it to. I love the face recognition on my iPhone and getting in applications. As I get older, I have a harder time remembering passwords. I do have a password app. So, and then anytime you go through a pen test, oh, we got great passwords, but they can, you find out people are using, seasons and years and stuff. I said, well, that passes Microsoft complexity, but is painfully obvious. It was a bad password. But so I think those are opportunities for us. I don't think we like passwords, anyone in security, but you have to have good ones. Do you have technology? We look at the CyberArks and that kind of thing that are kind of starting to make passwords transparent. I would love to say that's the way to go. You got Microsoft saying, hey, passwords are ancient history, but I think the time to evolve into healthcare is going to take a while. We have a lot of old technology that's just capitally intensive. So how do we kind of front end that stuff and make that easier? I think those are going to be the challenges. I think the tap and go is at least would make it easier for the doctors, right? So that makes our lives easier. But I'd be interested to seeing where this goes to mainstream.
Great. Well, it looks like we're at the hour. It's 11:55. I just wanted to again thank all of the panelists for their amazing knowledge and contribution of it to us. And I feel like there is just more wealth of information, and we could probably spend the next 3 hours still chatting if we wanted to. But phenomenal panel, and thank you again. And then again, now this is the movie disclaimer in reverse. This is a work of truth. Any similarity to movie stars, living or dead, good, bad, or ugly, or fictional events is purely coincidental. All right, thank you very much, everyone. I'll turn it over.
All right, thank you, Fred. Thank you, team. I noticed that there were a couple questions in the Q&A, so I didn't know if you wanted to try to cover those. I know we're starting to run out of time, so I think maybe we'll do some follow-ups later.
In
I
the
think we
spirit of
addressed-
Halloween, I was going to say it's click or trick, or trick or click is what we're doing. So we're going around in spam costumes, my whole security team, and we're handing out candy and doing quizzes to see if people think it's spam or not. So that's what I'll leave you on for training and awareness.
There we go. I like that.
Awesome.
All right,
Alex,
Chris.
I think we did address some of the questions, or a number of the questions in the chat. So I think there's a few more outstanding that we can touch on. So.
Yeah, agreed. I appreciate that. All right, well, Fred, Chris, Stephen, and Greg, I really appreciate you guys spending time with us here this morning, being able to share some great insights. I love this. I think the old days of IT sounding like, sitting on high, having access to, seeing everything from their perspective and shutting off walls and doors and everything are long gone. And so the way you guys discuss trying to engage all of the end users and get them feeling like they're part of the whole program, I think is essential. So great insights, great discussion.